Hi, everyone, and welcome back. My guest today is Piers Henwood, a Grammy and Juno nominated musician, one of Canada's top artist managers. He's co-founder of Amelia Artists, guiding the careers of Tegan and Sara, Bedouin Soundclash, and many more, while making music himself with Jets Overhead and Astrocolor. From gold records and international tours to Grammy and Academy Award nominations, Piers has lived music from every angle, and today we're here to hear his story. Please welcome Piers Henwood. Well, thanks, Piers, for coming down and being on the podcast. I really appreciate it, you taking the time.
Thanks for having me, Wayne. Good to be here.
Yeah, you bet. We've known each other for a long time, but not super well. So we'll go over a few things.
We know each other from the famous halls of Long McQuaid over the years, where you helped me with many a guitar decision. Helped me choose between so many different models.
That's right. There's a lot of models out there, and even more today, I suppose. But before I get into my questions, I get a lot of these. I do a deep dive, I always say to my guests, to let them know on my guests before the podcast. So a lot of things online, as you probably have found out, not always correct. So if any of my questions are totally off, just tell me and correct me.
I'll correct any misinformation.
Yeah, because there's probably lots out there on all of us. But one thing I'm really curious about before I get into the questions, and I don't want you to feel like, I don't want to name drop, but you've been on so many stages with your bands and stuff, Jets Overhead in particular, and played in some major festivals and charity events. And you've even been on stage with Neil Young, I understand, and even partied at his ranch.
Oh boy, we're into the heavy duty stuff right away here.
Right away, because I'm really curious to hear more about that. Yeah, we talked once before, very little about it.
Yeah,
and ever since then, I've been I can't wait to ask you questions about it. So tell me, first of all, before the partying at his ranch, Neil Young puts on some kind of charity event every year, is it? Or?
Yeah, he used to do an event called the Bridge School Benefit. And a lot of this connection really comes from Tegan and Sara, our longtime management clients back in the day. And so Neil's son, Ben, was born with cerebral palsy and had severe speech impediments. And Neil and his wife, Peggy, back, I think in the 80s, originally conceived the idea where they realized there was a real lack of resources for kids with severe speech impediments. And they founded the Bridge School in the Bay Area, in the San Francisco Bay Area. And one of their mandates was to do an annual fundraiser concert to support the Bridge School that helps kids in positions like Ben was in. And through Tegan and Sara originally being signed to Neil Young and his longtime manager, Elliot Roberts' record label, Vapor Records, back in the 2000s, which is when we started managing them, they got invited to do the Bridge Benefit a bunch of times over the years. And then Elliot, Neil's manager, became a bit of a fan of my band Jets Overhead in that era too. So we actually got invited to the Bridge Benefit one year with my band also on the second stage. So that was amazing. But most of my Bridge memories really come through sort of the Tegan and Sara era and being there when they were performing.
Oh, okay. And I thought it was with the Jets Overhead.
It was, Jets was one year, but we did the event, I think 3 years with Tegan and Sara, and then we'd often get invited on non-years. But yeah, the amazing thing about Bridge was all players were asked to play acoustically. Neil's concept was that you'd sort of strip down production and just make it about an acoustic presentation of songs, and all the kids from the school were always on stage. Many of them in wheelchairs. And so it was a really amazing concert backdrop and always full of special events. And Neil would always call on friends to come and perform. So, the Bridge School over the years hosted everyone from Paul McCartney to Brian Wilson and the Beach Boys. And I think I was telling you the Brian Wilson story is one that I've actually never really told publicly, but I've told it a bit this year. And I think
for the first time on this podcast.
Okay. I maybe hinted at you when we had coffee the other day. Because Brian died this year, I think it's been on my mind, and I've sort of told the story a little bit, at least internally to friends. It's a bit of a hard one to tell without sounding like a blowhard, but I'll give it a shot. But one year, the tradition was Neil would always host a welcome event for all the performers because everyone was donating their time.
Right.
And he would host that event on the Friday night of the long weekend, which was usually late October, at his famous ranch in California, which is of course, where he had his famous barn where he recorded the Harvest album and where he, has lived most of his life. And so,
and I think he had an album called The Barn too, didn't he?
Yeah, did he? He's had so many albums. Yeah,
I know. He's something's coming out all the time.
Anyway, we'd get invited to so-called Broken Arrow Ranch, and it was always an amazing experience to be in that environment. And we were always, trying to obviously behave ourselves, take in the moment, and just enjoy this as a welcome for the weekend. And one year, there were usually about 60, 80 people there, including all the artists and supporting crew. And one year at Neil's house with him hosting everyone, I was standing in his kitchen having a glass of wine. I was talking to a couple other people, and Brian Wilson was playing that year. And I'll never forget, Brian Wilson sort of arrived and walked into the kitchen front door, and I was sort of standing there drinking my wine thinking, oh my gosh, here's Brian Wilson.
Wow.
Neil Young, incredible to be nearby him, and now here's another legend. And
unbelievable.
So I was sort of taking the moment, and Brian slowly started walking towards me, and I was like, wait a minute, is Brian walking towards me?
Yeah, no kidding.
I just couldn't get over what was happening, and so I was talking to the circle I was in, but sure enough, Brian came right in, and he sort of interrupted the circle. I was holding a glass of wine, and he looked at me, and he said, "Can I have a sip of your wine?"
Oh no!
And I looked at him, I said, "Sure, Brian." I handed him my glass of wine. He swigged the whole thing in one swoop, and he looked at me and he said, "Don't tell my wife. I'm not supposed to be drinking."
Oh.
And he walked away.
Oh, wow.
And so it was this incredible one. The circle I was with were like, oh my gosh, what happened? That was like the most amazing interaction with Brian Wilson. And a woman named Bonnie, who's Neil's longtime colleague and assistant, saw it all go down, and she came up to me and she was like, "Piers, that was the most amazing interaction I've ever seen here. You have to take that wine glass home as a memento."
Oh, wow.
It's not Neil's. We rented all the glassware for the event. So they gave me the wine glass after I left that night, and I still have it at home in a case.
Wow.
And so I always thought that was going to be the end of the story. But a couple of years later, I was at Canadian Music Week, which is it used to be the annual conference that always happened for the Canadian industry. It changed branding this year to Departure. But anyway, Canadian Music Week, big annual event. And I was talking to a gentleman named Steve Martin, not the actor, but rather the agent. And Steve Martin was Brian Wilson's longtime agent.
Okay.
And we were kind of talking about Brian, and I said, I have this amazing story. I was with Brian at Bridge one year, and he was like, oh my gosh, I was there that year.
Oh, wow.
And so I told him the story, and he's like, that is so classic. That is so Brian. He said, I have had so many meals with Brian at beautiful restaurants in Los Angeles where we'll be sitting tightly packed with tables along row, and Brian will literally reach over to people's plate he doesn't know and take a French fry and just say, "Hey, can I have one?" And people realize it's Brian Wilson, and they say, like, "Okay,
sure.
no problem."
Yeah.
And then the final thing, this is a long story, but I'll just get it all out and you can edit me if you want to.
Yeah, that's
but
all
the
right.
final part of the story was Steve said, I was there that night too at Neil's house. And I told him the story. I was like, so he takes my wine and he just walks off, and we put two and two together. Brian, after that moment with me getting the wine from me, he walked in the living room and Steve was with him, and he said the next funniest thing happened. He said Eddie Vedder was there that year because he was playing the festival also, or at least the fundraiser. And Eddie was apparently sort of really nervous to meet Brian, and he sort of like went up to him cautiously and said, "Hi, Brian, I'm Eddie Vedder. I'm a huge fan." And Steve said, Brian just looked at him and said, "Oh, hey, can you get me a glass of Pepsi, please?" And ordered him to get him a drink. And apparently Eddie kind of skulked off and actually got him some Pepsi.
Yeah, right. That's hilarious.
So that's my story. I hope I didn't sound like a blowhard telling you. But it was an amazing event. It doesn't go on anymore. But the Bridge School, an amazing school and foundation that still exists. The annual concert hasn't been happening in recent years, but we have a lot of gratitude for having been invited and for Tegan and Sara connecting those original dots.
And having those kind of experiences is not every day you're at a party with Brian Wilson and Neil Young.
I was definitely pinching myself.
Yeah.
I'm not worthy.
Yeah, right. Well, thanks for the story. For starters, on some of my things here, Piers, take us back to 2002. Is that when you started Amelia Artists?
Yeah, we incorporated the company in 2003, so it was right in that time period. So my kind of arc up into that point, I'd gone to school in California for university, and I'd kind of gotten like a suit and tie business job out of school and was kind of working the corporate life in San Francisco. And I was secretly starting to write songs, and I really was dreaming about getting into music, but I didn't know exactly how to do it. And I eventually took a leap of faith and kind of left my corporate job and started a band. And my original bands here in Victoria, I was sort of typically usually self-managing and doing a lot of the business. And so I eventually had a desire to start doing a bit of management and business for other bands too. So around 2003, I was starting to do Jets Overhead, my long-term band, but then also started the management company to start helping manage other bands with our first clients back then being Tegan and Sara.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So, and then in 2018, roughly, did you start a record label as well?
Yeah, we started Amelia Recordings. So the management company was always called Amelia Artists, and the record label, we started a different entity in 2018. We mostly started originally just to support the sort of releases of artists that we were managing. In today's streaming era, you know, often as a manager, you're kind of doing a lot of things, wearing a lot of hats. And we found in that era, we were sort of sometimes functioning as a record label. So we thought, why don't we formalize this? Yeah. And then we expanded the record label during COVID when things really slowed down with the world and in particular management, no touring. So we started signing more artists and sort of growing the record label during the COVID timeframe. But yeah, there's sort of two different entities within the Amelia family, one being an artist management company and the other being a record label.
Right. Now, Tegan and Sara, how long did you manage them?
We started in basically July of 2003, and we did have a change during COVID. So we did change our role in 2020. So we basically did sort of 17, 18 years. And
that's a good run.
Yeah. And you may be right. Now you may even be right. If you got your research, maybe it was 2002 we started. Anyway, it was right in that time frame. I don't know my own dates at this point. Yeah. But yeah, Tegan and Sara were the first major client, and yeah, we had a wonderful run with them. We're still in touch closely, and they're doing great. They're taking a bit of a year off this year, and they've done so many things. I mean, they've released so many albums. They got into making documentaries and making TV and writing a book, and so they're sort of, you know, a multimedia empire at this point.
They are, yeah. Speaking of documentaries, I saw on Disney Plus, I believe, the documentary on Tegan and Sara. Absolutely amazing story. It's a kind of whodunit mystery story. I won't say much about it but I highly encourage anybody, a fan, or even if you're not a fan, to look it up on Disney Plus. It's an amazing story. Like for the hour and a half, whatever length of time, I was spellbound by the story. You're in it. You're interviewed as well. Yeah,
it was an amazing thing to live through. It was actually a scary thing to live through. The film's called Fanatical, The Catfishing of Tegan and Sara, and it's a documentary that explores essentially some impersonation that happened predominantly, really fully focused around Tegan, that we discovered around, here I'm going to get dates again wrong, but around 2009 is when it started to come to our attention. But essentially, there were some malevolent fans, maybe multiple, maybe one, that started impersonating Tegan and pretending they were Tegan on anonymous online forums and through various email addresses. They just sort of tricked fans into believing they were communicating with Tegan. Yeah. And it was early in this era of catfishing. It was early in, you know, obviously way pre-AI. It was sort of a bit of a precursor to all these things that we now know more clearly are dangers in our society. But the documentary was made by a wonderful filmmaker named Erin Lee Carr, who did the Britney versus Spears documentary about her conservatorship, which is a great documentary also. So a wonderful team. And it's a really compelling story about sort of the dangers of fandom, the underbelly of fandom. I think a lot of people obviously believe that musicians, when they achieve fame and success, that life is nothing but rosy, but we all know it's not really the case behind the scenes.
Can be a darker side.
And Tegan and Sara had enough fame. I mean, obviously they're not Taylor Swift, but they really have such a dedicated and broad global fan base. They really did experience some of the underbelly of fame in a deep, dark way, and especially Tegan, who had this impersonation problem. And so the documentary explores our efforts back in that era of trying to solve the case. It was very difficult. We basically, sometimes the manager has to do anything under the sun, and we kind of became private investigators briefly because it was hard to get the police's attention on it. It was not technically yet a criminal situation because there wasn't an actual case of, say, fraudulent behavior financially. There was no physical violence, luckily, but that was why it was very stressful at the time. Because
mental stress,
mental anguish, emotional stress for sure. And back in the day, we didn't know if it might tip over into something physical.
Scary.
There was a fear that this person that was having these online deep sort of quasi-romantic relationships with fans online would one day invite a fan to meet and that something bad might transpire. So we were very nervous about it. We were worried about Tegan and Sara's safety, everyone's safety. And yeah, the documentary does a great job of covering the ups and downs of that era.
Yep. So I highly recommend it, everyone. Check it out. You'll be amazed and fascinated for an hour and a half for sure. Now, originally you came into the industry as a musician yourself, Piers. How did being a performer shape your perspective of being a manager?
Yeah, great question. I think about that a lot. I was lucky with Tegan and Sara because they knew before I started managing them that I was a musician in a band. And so it was sort of always part of my life and so on. And
Sure.
I think that on the positive side, understanding what it's like to create, to songwrite, to put music out there, to sort of put yourself at risk through sort of creative vulnerability, to get out on the road, to tour, to live the cycle of touring. I think it is helpful to understand that because sometimes as a manager, we used to joke about that in the office. Sometimes we'd have clients, call our office the ivory tower, not us in particular, but the notion of the management office or any, creative office, you're sort of away from the reality of the day-to-day life of a musician. So the ivory tower was the idea that, hey, you guys booked us for this crazy press day and then the show and then this, and we couldn't get here on time and everything was too busy. Sometimes things can look okay on paper, but they're much more difficult to live when you're living. And I think that's sometimes why artists burn out, is because there's so much demand for time and attention. And so I think me also being in bands and knowing what it was like to get on stage at a big festival like Coachella and how nerve-wracking that was, or knowing what it was like to travel around the world, definitely helped me have, sympathy and empathy for all the clients we've worked with. And hopefully helps me to kind of talk creatively in a more nuanced way with artists also.
Yeah, sure. The pitfalls and
the
how
the
to
ups
get
and downs.
somewhere. The ups and downs. So it certainly would help a lot.
Yeah.
So how do you choose an artist to work with? What are the qualities you're looking for in an artist?
Yeah, good question. We've always been a small boutique company, so we've never sort of proactively hung a shingle and gone out and sort of done wide calls for artists. So most of our artists have come through various forms of word of mouth. But in terms of the qualities, we've typically been sort of like a song-based lens. We do work with some electronic artists. It's much more instrumental, but over the years, on average, I think a great song performed well, sung by a great voice are kind of the two obvious building blocks. But then I think the other intangible that maybe a lot of artists don't understand that are up and coming that want to be, more successful artists is just the personality aspect also. There's such a, it's such a grind to have success in the music business. And there really has to be a personality that's willing to go through the grind, that's willing to get vulnerable, that's willing to go through a bit of pain, and that's not for everyone. And
no, that's not for everyone, because sometimes you're sleeping on floors.
Yeah,
sometimes you're not eating 3 meals a day.
Exactly.
Traveling through the night, through rain and snow. There's all kinds of things. Yeah, it's a much tougher industry and business, and you see somebody on an album cover and think, oh man, how lucky are they? But to get there, there's so much you have to go through.
Totally. Yeah. So the personality thing, I think there's two sides of it. There's the sort of, there's the ability to deal with what the industry throws at you, but then there's also the ability to present yourself well. And I think having, the ability to speak well and have personality and sometimes be funny on camera and like these intangibles really will help artists. I always think, it's easy to cite, but would the Beatles have broken America the way they did if they weren't so great at those first press conferences and all the quips and so on? I always think they're kind of that great first example of an artist that obviously had the goods. They had the great songs. They had the great...
and they put in the time by
of course,
going to Germany and performing 4 or 5 hours sets, I'm told, for night after night after night. They certainly, that helps. You got to put in the time. Yeah,
they put in the time, but then they had the personality and the camaraderie and the ability to make the quips that made people love them. And I think that can be a helpful part for sure for artists. Yeah.
Now, speaking of some of your artists, Luca Fogale, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. He's putting out an album. It's coming out January 31st, I understand.
Exactly. Yeah, we've been working on that album for essentially the past year. Yeah. He's signed nowadays to Network Records, which is a wonderful long-time label based out of Vancouver that was founded by Terry McBride and Mark Jowett back in the day.
Oh, okay.
And Network's a great label nowadays, a great roster globally. And so, yes, we manage Luca. And very excited about this album. It's got a great song called Horizon, which Luca tends to be a very introspective and sometimes quiet songwriter, which is beautiful.
He is, but it's so beautiful.
It's so beautiful. He's got speaking of voice, he's got a stunning voice.
Unbelievable.
And a great songwriter. And this single Horizon is a bit more of an upbeat song for Luca, so we've been really excited about it. It's doing well. And the album's a wonderful album out end of January.
And what's it called again?
The album is called Challenger.
Oh,
and the
okay.
main lead single, which is already out, is called Horizon.
Well, take a note of that, everyone, because Luca's voice is so beautiful, and his songs are so sensitive.
He's a sensitive soul.
I love listening to his music. Yeah, so
yeah, totally.
Congratulations on the new album coming out.
Appreciate it.
Can you share a story about any turning point where one of your artists' career really took off?
Yeah, I mean, the easy ones on that in terms of recalling immediate stories would definitely revolve around Tegan and Sara. They had a number of them, but I guess the sort of arc of it is that there's rarely, I think, in today's industry, one moment. Speaking of the Beatles, there's not the equivalent of the Ed Sullivan moment where half or three quarters of a country is watching one thing. We've got obviously very diffuse media now, and even over the years when, say, with Tegan and Sara, we did David Letterman or Jay Leno or Conan O'Brien, you would notice a bump in SoundScan, i.e. sales, but it wasn't like life changed magically the next day. It was sort of part of a puzzle. But
I think I saw them on David Letterman.
Sure, yeah. They did Letterman a few times, and it was always fun to be there. This will get back into Beatles themes, but Letterman used to tape, and now Colbert tapes in the Ed Sullivan Theater, speaking of Ed Sullivan. So you'd be on the stage where the Beatles first played, and you'd be underground in the old dressing rooms, and it was always magical to be there. It
was. I actually went to a Dave Letterman show one time, which is a story in itself, but I won't get into that. But I remember sitting there going, I can't believe I'm in the room where the Beatles played the Ed Sullivan show.
Yeah, it was magical.
It's a magical room, Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so with them, I guess what I was getting at is, those big moments you kind of think, oh, maybe that'll change everything. They were always great and impactful, but they weren't necessarily the moments that changed things. I think looking back at what really took them from where they were to where they eventually got to were a couple songs. One of Sarah's early songs called Walking with a Ghost was a big moment. It started to get some radio play in the States, and also Jack White and the White Stripes actually covered that song and did a really fun version of Walking with a Ghost. And that song, his version of it didn't really blow up per se, but it just added this new realm of credibility when they were sort of still fighting for a certain degree of credibility within the indie cool scene.
Yep.
And then the song Closer that Tegan wrote later, sort of 2013, 2014 era, really was a big pop through moment, breakthrough moment. So those two songs were big moments.
Yeah.
They had a lot of big moments with Grey's Anatomy that really helped. Actually, they actually, this is a little known story we've rarely told publicly, but they were actually asked originally to write the theme song for Grey's Anatomy, and this was before anyone knew what Grey's Anatomy would become. Shonda Rhimes was actually a bit of a fan, and we got a first version of like the pilot of Grey's Anatomy to view, and we made what at the time was a bit of a difficult decision, but we said no, they said no, and we all agreed. We all said no to writing the theme song. Because we didn't want, if we were worried that if the show did take off and become really well known, that it would really pigeonhole them and they could be like the famous Friends theme song.
Yeah.
That, maybe it's the one song you remember.
Yep.
But we loved the pilot and we said, we'll license any of their existing songs to the show. We just don't want to actually write the theme song.
Right.
And so in the end, that first
Yeah.
season of Grey's Anatomy used about 8 or 9 Tegan and Sara songs. And it was a really pivotal time in their career. It was on the So Jealous album and the songs were doing well. And that show, as it started to explode, really helped build Tegan and Sara's profile alongside the show. So that comes to mind too.
And financially, you make money when they play the song in the background of a show.
Yeah,
too,
absolutely.
Right?
Yeah. In our business, we call it a sync or a sync license. And it pays off two sides. There's two sides of the copyright in music. I won't bore the audience with this, but yeah, you get some revenue from both sort of the recording side and the songwriting or publishing side.
Right. Oh,
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah. Now, you've worked on both the indie and major label projects. What's the key difference behind the scenes of those two companies?
Well, it's a good question. I think it's evolving, so it's hard to answer perfectly in real time. I think back in the day, the traditional difference was the major label model. Well, deal wise, was sort of traditionally like a recoupable based model. You'd always hear the stories of bands that you think have done very well, but they're in debt to their record label. They're not recouping. That was based on the old model of, usually like a 14 to 18% royalty. And a lot of money being spent to help with recording, but everything being paid as an advance. And so you're sort of recouping against the advance, and the label's acting as a bit of a bank. But then what you get in the old traditional major label model is the power of a bank and also the power of a major promotional machine, especially when it came to the gatekeeping side of the business, such as radio and press and publicity. And back in the day, the indie label was typically doing more net 50-50 deals. So they were sort of like more even as a split, but typically smaller budgets and maybe a little bit less power than the major label
and
system.
Would the indie business be you would have to do more of the footwork yourself?
Often.
Yeah.
I think, hard to generalize.
You don't have
widely.
as big of a machine.
You don't usually have quite as big as a machine.
Yeah.
And nowadays, both models work. I mean, there's obviously been lots of debate in our industry about what is the purpose of record labels. We now have, with streaming and with digital distribution, you don't need a record label.
Yeah.
Back in the day, record labels were needed, and they were also gatekeepers. You couldn't get a song released unless you had a deal that then resulted in physical product, vinyl, tape, CDs, eventually being on the shelf. Now we live in the infinite digital universe, so we can all release music, and that's a huge pro. I love the democratic aspect of streaming. The challenge is now discovery. And so that's, again, where you can kind of debate the value of labels, major or indie or no label at all. But it really becomes the power of promotion and the power of helping to break through the clutter, because there's so much music released nowadays.
There is, yeah. Speaking of that, your artist sold over 1.5 million albums in the pre-streaming time.
Yeah.
So what was that journey like before the streaming took over?
Yeah.
Like, I guess some of that you sort of already mentioned.
Yeah.
But
A lot of that figure would be Tegan and Sara sales over the years. We managed $1.65 back in that era, and he was doing really good business. It was a big deal to get scans, which is to say that I remember, well, speaking of other breakthrough Tegan and Sara moments, they got a tour opening for the Killers in, I think it was 2005. Again, the Coachella cycle, as right as the Killers were coming up in the industry too. And I remember every night after shows, we'd be selling CDs at the show, often selling a couple hundred a night, and it was great numbers. And every night we'd have to fax the number of CDs we sold on an old SoundScan form, SoundScan being the system that, officially monitors sales. And it was a huge deal to the record label at that time to be able to pick up the sales, because it would show that the band was growing. And especially if there was, say, radio play in the market, you'd say, okay, there's radio play, there's fans coming to the show, they're selling X number of CDs in the market, it's really starting to connect. And so, back in that day, I remember literally panicking late at night after shows to fill out these forms along with tour managers to get these numbers in. And it was a really important part of the business back then.
For sure.
And now, of course, everything's on the streaming platforms, and you can see on Spotify how many streams you have. So it's a very different world.
Totally,
Data is important in a new way now, which is to say, in that early era, I think there was sort of the notion of, maybe you get discovered as a band. You get discovered by an A&R person playing a dart club, and there's like, oh, we're going to make this band famous. Now most labels want to see a band making some headway themselves because we have all the tools available as an indie band to do things. So nowadays it's more like, hey, you have a great song, but release it yourself, make it go. Let's see how it goes. Then we'll put some fuel on the fire later if things are going well. Yeah,
I've read many times that in the early days, 60s or whatever, 70s, 60s when I was really getting into music, that labels would put out an album and they'd be okay if the sales were soft, because they felt like they were building an artist, and they were okay with a slow start.
Yeah, the development model.
But nowadays, like you say, you have to go prove yourself so that
it's self-development now.
Mm-hmm.
It's like we've got to read self-help books and do self-development in the music business.
Yeah. So how did you adapt your management strategies when streaming changed the industry? Did you do anything?
Yeah, well, it's a really good question. I think as managers, we were always generally pro the changes because we saw things becoming more democratic and less sort of paywalled by gatekeepers. I think I'll tell a Jets Overhead story on this. Actually, my old band, Jets Overhead, in 2005, on the heels of sort of the Napster era, the iTunes store was starting to happen. We put out our album Bridges as a free download off our website as MP3s, but a so-called pay what you want or voluntary download system. So we had a PayPal link and people could, pay for the music if they chose to, but we wanted to make it available. And so we actually did that about a year before Radiohead eventually made the model more famous. They released their album In Rainbows and famously did it as a pay what you want. And it caused a ton of industry debate because some people were like, well, you can't give away music for free. You have to value it. And at that time, there was just so much friction in how to define the value of music. It was pre-streaming, pre-Spotify. And so our model as managers was always to say it's most important for fans to be able to get the music and for it to be at worst, a calling card for the band's broader career, to go see the band touring, to sell merchandise and so on. And so we were always believers that things would work out. We didn't want music to be free. We believe music has value, but we also didn't believe in the era of suing fans for downloading music and so on. So as managers, we're, trying to take a holistic view, whereas back in that era, a lot of record labels were seeing their business plummet. So they were taking more of the litigious view and going after kids who were downloading music illegally.
Yeah. It was that time period you're referring to, it was changing, and there was a lot of fighting the streaming thing because people were taking it free in places and stuff like that.
Well, the iPod was an amazing revolution. The idea that you could have all this music in your pocket and you didn't suddenly have to carry around CDs, let alone vinyl. Yeah. And then the idea that all these years later, you'd have the world's jukebox in your pocket via your phone and pay a monthly subscription. I mean, that was always the dream, but at certain points it was unfathomable. And then as it became close to reality, it was starting to, like, Spotify started to happen in the Scandinavian countries. As it started to become dominant in North America, we as managers quickly adapted because it was clear that this was going to be the future, and we didn't have the record label business to hang on to. So it was, we greeted it positively. I mean, you can debate pros and cons around pay equity and so on, but at the end of the day, I like the flattening of the distribution system, the ability for anyone to release music, and the ability for it to be heard around the world in any country, or virtually any country, is very important.
That's the positive side of it, for sure. I'm an older guy, so I still like to hold something in my hands, a CD or an LP even, and read the back and the credits and stuff. But, things...
When vinyl's had its resurgence, and that's been fun to see. I mean, if you'd asked me back in the day, would the two remaining, mediums be streaming and vinyl, I would have said no. I would have guessed it would have been maybe some people hanging on to CDs, but of course CDs have kind of become less valuable. People still value the vinyl, so it's kind of it's a good combo. If you love a band, buy the vinyl and stream it wherever you stream.
Yep. Now, you're a founding member of Jets Overhead. You've played a lot of massive festivals and things like that. What was that experience like?
We had a great run with Jets. I
remember hearing you on the radio a lot.
Yeah, we had a song called Heading for Nowhere that did well. And I mean, I owe a lot of my sort of life and career to that band, in the sense that I learned to sort of self-manage a lot from that band. I learned the business of being a manager from managing my own band. And as we talked about earlier, I learned a bit about what it's like to actually be in a band that helps empathize and, relate to artists we're managing. Yep. But yeah, we got around the No Nation cycle. The album was called No Nations. That had Heading for Nowhere on it, 2009, 2010 era. We had some great times traveling around the world. We got Coachella, we got Bonnaroo, we did Olympics in Vancouver that year. We did Shanghai Expo over in China. Wow. And yeah, we never reached the point where we were anywhere close to the headlining spot of those major festivals. We were always early on the bill, but it was an amazing experience to be on those stages. And it was neat to, I've done Coachella with Tegan and Sara and the Funk Hunters and other artists too. And it's been fun to kind of be on those big stages, sometimes playing guitar and other times kind of standing with my arms crossed side stage, being like, I hope the show goes okay for the client.
Right.
Yeah.
Both sides of it. Yeah. Now, you got a Juno nomination for Jets Overhead as well, didn't you?
Back in that era,
What was that experience like? Did it mean a lot to you?
It did, it did. We've had a lot of Juno noms over the years with our family in general. I think we've had about 15 or 20 nominations between all the different artists we've managed. Yeah. And the Jets one was a fun one because it was actually truly for me and my band. Nice. Like per your earlier question, it didn't change our lives, but it was definitely like a nice line item to put in the bio. The Junos were in Saskatoon that year. We had a great trip to Saskatoon. We did not win, but we did attend and had a wonderful time. And it's a fun memory. You don't do arts, obviously, hopefully to specifically to get recognized, but there's no question in our business. You do a lot of toiling in the dark and you do a lot of soul searching, and it is nice once in a while to get recognition from the wider business. So that was definitely meaningful for our band.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Now, do you miss playing with Jets Overhead, playing live as opposed to being behind the scenes as a manager?
I was always more passionate about the songwriting and studio aspect of being in a band. So for me, I don't really miss playing live. I know there's members of the band that do. We actually, a couple months ago, just released an archive album. We've been pretty quiet with Jets Overhead, but we still have a pretty active fan base around the world. And again, talking about the positives of streaming, we can see people still streaming our music all around the world and discovering our music. And so we have a bunch of music we never released back in the day sitting on the shelf, and we decided to put it out because we often get notes from fans saying, hey, when's music coming?
Oh, great.
And so, yeah, we've got an album out now called Ordinary Dreamers, Rarities and Demos Volume 1.
Oh, wow.
And it was really fun to put some effort and time back into again and kind of get back into that legacy.
Yeah.
There's no plans at the moment for live, but you never know. Never say never.
Never say
but
never.
Yeah, for me, my passion's always more been on the songwriting and studio side. I never say no to a day in a recording studio.
Yeah, right. I love being in a studio as well. I've done some recording over the years, and I love to just see a piece of music come together and stuff. So well, you kind of answered this question because I was going to ask you, are you currently working on any new material for the Jets?
Yeah.
But you're releasing just some older
We're releasing
things.
old archive stuff. We're calling it an archive project right now, but it has kind of remotivated us to get back together. And there is talk about doing some actual new band sessions and maybe getting back into the studio for some fresh material. And then I still also have a separate creative life with a band, also Victoria-based, called Astrocolor.
I was going to ask you about that. What's that like? Playing in that band, because that's a totally different kind of sound.
It's quite different. Yeah, it's traditionally been much more instrumental based. Yeah. It started out as a project that almost was an antidote to Jets. We spent all our years with Jets writing verse, chorus, verse songs, writing pop rock songs, and always worrying about structure.
Yeah.
And I got into really enjoying sort of instrumental improvisation with some friends and old roommates, and we would have these great jams in an old living room we all used to share back in the day. And we started a little side project, and the side project became relatively successful. Astrocolor's had 4 nominations as Instrumental Artist of the Year at the Western Canadian Music Awards, which is kind of
you won it one year.
We won it one year. It's sort of the feeder system to the Junos, not quite as glorious, but a starting point. And the band's gotten a fair bit of play on radio and some festival success. And it's much more of like a sort of improvised experimental project. So it's a different kind of brain function than worrying about writing the perfect verse, chorus, verse structure. Astrocolor does do songs nowadays too, but that was the original impetus, was kind of just to let off some steam and improvise. And I'm a big believer in what I like to think of as lifelong creativity, which is the idea that even if you're no longer a professional musician, I think exercising creatively is important. It's just like exercising physically. Yep. As we get older, I think we tend to think that, creativity is just for the young or just for kids. And if you're not doing it professionally, what are you doing? But I view it no different than still playing a recreational sport or going to the gym to work out before the workday. We don't question that.
No.
Whereas with creative people, we're like, well, what are you doing? What's the point? Like, are you trying to be famous? What? You're in your 40s. That's pathetic. But you're just trying to exercise your creative brain and enjoy a process. And that's how I look at it. So I intend to always do some version of creativity. And right now, in recent years, it's mostly been Astrocolor. But now with the Jets Overhead stuff going again, it's been fun to kind of double dip again.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah. Now, in Astrocolor, I wrote down his name because it's so long. Neil James Cook-Dallin.
Yes,
Is
Neil.
He still in the band?
Yeah. Neil's sort of front man and my sort of band leader and co-band member. Yeah, exactly.
Right. Yeah, I know Neil. I've been down to his studio.
Yeah.
Burnin' Rainbow Studios.
Yeah, Neil's an accomplished engineer and producer, and he's very good with electronics. He's sort of a jack of all trades, man of all hats, and so he adds a fun element. The rest of the band was sort of fulfilled more of like a live musician instrumentation kind of role, and then Neil provides more of a beats DJ sequencing loop kind of role. So it's sort of the version of the band right now typically is sort of a DJ plus live musicians kind of package.
Yeah. His studio, he gave me a tour one time, and it's quite an interesting studio. It's about 5 blocks from here, downtown Victoria.
Yeah, no, it's a bit of a hidden gem. You wouldn't know it. It's kind of right near the Odeon Theater, but great gear, great space, good creative space. Yeah, we've made all the Astrocolor albums in that space.
Perfect. So we're almost out of time.
Okay,
Piers.
Too soon.
Is there anything you'd like to bring up that we haven't brought up? I have a couple more questions, but anything?
I think we've covered some good ground. Yeah. I'm happy if you're happy, but you can.
Yeah, just a couple more. Does being a Canadian give artists and managers a unique perspective?
Oh, yeah.
Especially in a global music scene. And if so, how?
Yeah, good question. Let me take a water before I answer.
I think I'll do the same.
I've thought about that question a lot.
Oh, yeah.
I've also thought about the question, an offshoot of that question, which is the Victoria question, specifically being in Victoria on an island in Canada. How does that affect a musician? And I mean, there's so many different ways to look at it. I think that, let me start Victoria, then I'll go Canada. So I think Victoria is so interesting because the pros of Victoria, it's away from the sort of rat race of Toronto and LA and New York. And there's no question that you can probably more quickly make progress in the industry if you're in one of those cities.
In one of the big
but
centers.
You can also really get swept up in the creative rat race, and you can lose, I think, yourself a little bit in that. And so I think a benefit of Victoria is this sort of creative incubator, the idea that you're away from some of those pressures and that you can really create something unique here maybe more easily because you're not always looking over your shoulder to what everyone else is doing beside you like you might in a big city.
Sense,
And so I feel like that explains why there have been some really great creative projects that have come out of this city over the years and why there's so many great musicians here.
Unbelievably
But there is a challenge of getting off the island, and obviously some artists, just the challenge of even getting to Vancouver, it makes it that much more difficult. So I think touring off of Victoria can be a challenge. And then when you add the border to that, I think Canadians Canadians have a great perspective. So I think as songwriters, artistically, I think being a Canadian is nothing but a positive when it, say, comes to breaking into the States. And we know there's so many huge artists that most Americans don't even know are Canadian, including the biggest pop stars of the moment, from Drake to Justin Bieber to whoever. But the challenge for the mid-level to smaller artists is the U.S. border, regardless of current administration and issues, has always been very difficult for musicians. And so we in Canada allow musicians, American musicians, to come in with very little red tape, whereas the States forces Canadian musicians just to go down and play a simple gig in Seattle to go through a ton of red tape to get a working visa. They're expensive, especially for an indie band. They can take a long time to process. You often, as a smaller band, get gigs last minute and you can't plan your tour a year ahead of time unless you're at a certain level. So the American border is a real problem for Canadian musicians. I actually have been passionate about this issue for quite a few years, and I wrote a op-ed for Variety, the big industry trade magazine, a couple years ago, and it sort of asked the question, like Coachella, as speaking of that festival, the year I wrote it, 50% of the artists were foreign artists. And I sort of asked the hypothetical question, like, what would the Coachella lineup look like if the international artists weren't there? And it would be decimated. And all these international artists, granted, most artists playing Coachella are doing well and can kind of deal with the legalities and the expense of the border. But it's just completely unfair, especially for developing musicians. And there's really no reason, I think, to be protectionist. We can all debate protectionism around timber or, various industries, but with the arts, I don't think it's a zero-sum game. So I hope the U.S. border loosens its position on Canadian musicians sometime soon.
Yeah, I've heard now that they're taking photos and fingerprints of everybody crossing. It's getting kind of ridiculous.
Yeah.
So finally, what's next for you as both a manager and as a musician? Anything coming up? Anything?
Yeah, I mean, always stuff going on. This year, the Luca album's about to come out, so we're really deep in the trenches on that right now. It's always a busy time before an album comes out, especially with a big infrastructure like network helping out around the world and, a global release. And we're planning, as I said, some more Jets Overhead stuff. Astrocolor is always going on in the background. We're building some other things in the background. So
you're a busy guy.
It's kind of, it's sort of all the usual things and wearing both hats.
Yeah, right. Well, do you have a website where people can look up who your artists are, what's going on, and perhaps can they reach out to you through that?
Yeah, for sure. I'm always happy to hear from people. I have a personal website nowadays because I do, speaking of the op-ed with Variety I do a fair bit of writing, sort of touching on industry issues and also creativity and business and the intersection. So
I've read some of your writings.
My personal website is my full name, Piers Henwood, Piers Henwood.com. And that website is quite blown out because it has lots of articles and so on. Our Amelia websites are a little bit more bare bones because we kind of take pride in being a little bit harder to reach on that side of things. Okay. But AmeliaArtist.com and AmeliaRecordings.com are up and running. And but a lot of my stuff more visibly is at PiersHenwood.com, and then my Instagram is at Piers Henwood.
Great. Yeah. Well, a pleasure talking to you, Piers. Thanks for taking the time.
Thanks for having me, Wayne, and thanks for helping me buy some of my first guitars back in the day. I wouldn't be here without you either.
Yeah, it was my pleasure. I love guitars and music, so it was fun. So thanks again. And thank you everyone who watched the program, and there are more episodes on the way, so stay tuned.